Welcome to Q&A practice. Let's get started with the defense attorney. A little four-voice practice. Ready? I'm not sure I remember what your question at this point was. My position would be that the trust speaks for itself and that he signed it and that he intended for all the terms of the trust to be operative. He has already testified, and it is asked and answered as to what his intent was with regard to establishing the trust. I think what I am trying to get into is the actual facts and not only statements of what his intent was. I think the question initially was getting into the issue of the corporation's revenue. I think this would also relate to the corporation in that I think that certainly would have some relevance as to what the corporation's value was in October after they were set up and lease was entered into. Read back the question. You asked for the 2000 figures. His testimony thus far is that there, correct me if I am misstating you, have not been any net profits in the corporation to date. I think the corporate records would speak for themselves also. If the corporate records would be available, the net income figure obviously could be decreased by increasing his salary. The net income could be consistently eaten. He already testified that maybe he had the power to control his salary. Let's go off the record. Back on the record, there has been an objection to my inquiry into the revenues of the two corporations that we have been discussing, so I won't proceed any further on that point. At the time that you transferred the corporate stock to the trust, you indicated that there was approximately $3,000 that had been contributed to each corporation initially. Now, at the time that the transfer occurred, obviously there was less money than that because you had made some payments. Anyway, were there any liabilities? Did the corporations have any liabilities at the time of the transfer of the stock to the trust other than its obligations to make the lease payments? Well, if I had received money from Ms. Scott, that would have been an obligation. You indicated that was subsequent. The dates, I'm unsure. There were normal bills due, but there were, from suppliers, nothing more than routine trade obligations. Yes. As far as the leases that were entered into in the buildings on the two corporations, who is obligated on those leases? I signed personally. I believe there were landlord waivers written up for the SBA. Excuse me, there was a point I wanted to make. I think the document noted agreement, which is 6 pages between all of the parties, Chase Bank, the SBA, and all of those. It required that the entity where furniture, fixtures, and inventory, and so forth, this document, don't forget, was allowing them to move whatever it was. The receiving entity was also to be liable to them. So, theoretically, based on the agreements between the parties, the corporations were liable too. Let's go off the record on this. Back on the record. So then, as far as the leases, the property leases, in the two corporations. They were then signed by the corporations, and you signed as guarantors on both of them? Right. I don't think I have any further questions. I have no questions. Why don't we stipulate on the transcript the original can be sent to your office? All right. Now we'll work on our transcript. And we will start with the defense. Ready? And there was nothing inconsistent with that particular finding based on the mechanism of injury with Ms. Waters being struck by a vehicle, was it? Can I hear that question back? I'll actually rephrase it. I don't like the inconsistent word part of that, 'cause I don't know what you mean by inconsistent. Not normal, or, well, let me put it this way. In your experience, a finding of a score of 4 for the verbal section of the Glasgow test, okay, would that be uncommon for somebody who was just struck by a vehicle based on your years of experience in this area? And I'll object that it's vague and ambiguous and an incomplete hypothetical. I would say it's common and uncommon. Every patient is different. It depends on the mechanism. It depends on the injury of the patient. If there's no set standard for what that score will be by somebody being struck by a vehicle with head trauma. Fair enough. If I understand your previous testimony, the reason you gave that score of 4 was based on the confusion that was being exhibited by Ms. Waters, correct? That's correct. And the confusion that you observed from Ms. Waters in your years of experience, could that be caused by being struck by a vehicle? The type of confusion you observed? It's possible. Now, just to the right, it says SpO2/CO2 detector, and it has some numbers in there. Do you see that particular section? Yes. What is the purpose of this section of this report, if you know? It tests the oxygen saturation in the blood. And the 99 under SpO 2%, what's the significance of that, if anything? 99% is almost perfect. 100% is perfect. They're getting perfect blood oxygenation throughout their body. It is taken at the extremity, usually a finger, and it will tell us how much oxygen the patient is actually receiving. And hers, she was saturating very well on 15 liters by mask. Is there anything at all that we are looking at here in this Defendant's Exhibit 3, the pre-hospital care report, that would be able to tell you or anybody whether there was any type of drugs or medication or anything in Ms. Waters' system at the time that this report was taken, or at the time of the incident itself? Just alcohol. And where is that section located? Under the level of consciousness. It's almost midway down on the left-hand side. There's an ETOH, odor, and that's the only section that you're aware of on this particular report that would deal with the issue of whether the patient may be under the influence of some sort of alcoholic substance or drug or medication or anything of that nature. I'm going to object that misstates his testimony. Do you understand the question at all? Well, I mean, a lot of these findings can be attributed to alcohol, and that is what I'm getting at. There was no way for me to determine whether it was alcohol or the injury, and that's what posed the biggest problem on this call for me, because I couldn't get an accurate assessment of this patient. And from a paramedic's perspective, why is it important that you receive an accurate assessment from any patient when you're called out to render treatment and care? Because the treatment I provide can possibly hurt somebody. Is it also important for you to make an accurate assessment of a patient in order to provide that information to the hospital when you're transferring the patient so that the treating nurses, physicians, and the like understand the current medical state? I guess yes. And that will conclude our Q&A practice.